Good afternoon, everybody. So previously we looked at an introduction to if statements, and we showed an example, or I showed an example, very similar to this program here. And this is in our example folders called ifStatementExample, where we start off with our standard setup function, where we set the size of our area, the background to be white, and then don't do anything else. Pretty straightforward. Then in our draw function, all we're doing is replacing the white background every single time. And here is our magic for this. So we're using our key press function, which if you remember, every time you press a key, this function runs. And once it runs, you have the special keyword key, which stores whatever key was pressed. And then we use an if statement, right, a special type of container to check to see what kind of key was used. In this case, we're seeing if the key is equal to, in other words, it is the same value as the letter A. Now remember that since we're doing just a single letter, that's just single quotes. And then everything that's inside that container is what runs if this statement is true. So if the key is pressed, this function runs. It gets to here, it checks to see if the key pressed was A. If it's not A, skips it completely, goes back to our main draw again. If it was A though, we set the fill to a color, and then, well, we draw a circle on the screen. So let's see what happens when we run this. So we get our display window, absolutely nothing there. If I press some random keys, nothing happens until I press the magical key A. And as you can see, very, very quickly, something flashes on the screen there. And if I press down and hold A, it sort of flashes. So what's happening here? What is the problem? Why does it not just show up and stay? Well, let's look at our code. So we press the key, it draws a circle. Remember, this draw thing is happening in the background all the time. So every time this runs, every time this loops, the background gets replaced. So we might be drawing our circle after we hit A really quickly, but it's also getting wiped over by the draw every single time, which is a bit of an issue. We don't really have any persistence here. So I've looked up another example to show you how to make persistence within your draw function. Persistence being something that sticks around. So here is ifStatementExample 2. And I've added a couple things. So if you remember, we have the basic types of data containers, what we call variables, and we had integer, which stores numbers. We've looked at those, and now another common one we're going to use is one called Boolean. And Boolean stores true and false, kind of the equivalent of ones and zeros we were working with in binary math, except for here a true is just a hidden 1 and a false is just a hidden 0. And I start off by making a Boolean variable, and I give the variable the name displayRedCircle. And I start off assigning it the value false, because I don't want my circle to be displayed at the very beginning once the program runs. I want it to be displayed when I tell it to display. Great, so after the variable declaration, we get to our setup phase. Our setup phase is the exact same as before. We set the size of our working area, and we set the background to be white. Our draw function is a little bit different, but we'll come back to that. Now if you look at the key press function, what have I added? Well, I've got if key is equal to A, fill, and draw the ellipse. This is actually the exact same as before. I haven't changed this at all. What I have added is this extra little bit. It says, okay, well, what if I hit the key B? Now, if I hit the key B, I'm going to change my variable. My Boolean variable is going to be set to the value true now instead of the false it previously was defaulted to. So if the key is pressed, if it's A, it'll do exactly what it did before. If it's not A, it'll check this one. Okay, and if it's B, then it will set displayRedCircle to true. And all the while, we've got this draw thing looping in the background over and over and over. And so before, we were still writing the background to be white every single time, but now I've added a bit of extra code. Inside here, we're using another if statement. And this if statement says, if the container display red circle, the variable display red circle, is holding the value true. Right? Remember, double equal signs means true is inside this container. We're checking, okay? And if this is true, if display red circle has the true thing stored in it, then the insides run. And it says choose a field color of red, and then draw a circle, right, at the middle of the screen, width divided by 2, height divided by 2, and make the circle 50 by 50. And so if we run this now, what happens? Well, I end up with the exact same program, except, and if I run it, when I press A, the same thing happens, right? Because I didn't change that code. But if I press B, I end up with a nice red circle that sticks around. Biggest problem, though, is if I hit A, we still get green flashes, but now the circle's stuck there absolutely forever. Which is fine if that's what you want to happen, but quite often we want a way to get rid of it, too. So what are we going to do? Well, instead of just changing this to true every single time we hit B, I'm going to try something a little bit different. I'm still working with display red circle, and I still want to change it to be something. But if you remember, when we were doing Boolean algebra, we had A, and we also had not A. And if A was 0, not A was 1. And if A was 1, not A was 2. Or sorry, 0. So the opposite, it was always the opposite of what it was. Now, luckily, the Boolean variables within processing have a not command too. So I can say, I want to take display red circle, load it up, and then I want to change it to its opposite using the not command. In this case, it's an exclamation point. And then I want to save that changed value back into display red circle. So all this is doing is taking whatever's there, flipping it, so if it's true, it turns to a false, and if it's false, it turns to a true, and then saving it back in here. So if I try running this now, what's going to happen? Well, when I press A, the same thing happens. I get the little flashy green light. If I press B, though, my red circle comes on. And if I press B again, off, on, off, on, off. Because when I pressed B the first time, this is being changed to true. And then every time this loops, it checks, yes, it's true. So I'm going to display this. I press B again. Display red circle is now flipped and saved back in itself. And now it's no longer true. So this won't run anymore, so it no longer draws it. And that's how we get persistence. I've got one more thing to talk about, and then I'll get you off to working on your assignment. A handful of you have already done this, so I figured I'd talk about it. And that's how to get images loaded up on the screen. So images, or at least when we're working with JPEGs, GIFs, and PNG files, you can use this method. And the first thing you have to do is load up a special container for that image. So just like we had special containers for just numbers and containers for Boolean values, true and false values, we have a container for images. And that container has the name called pImage. So in the variable section, just like you would declare any other container or data container, you would define the type and give it a name. In this case, I'm calling my container of the image the count. The next thing you have to do is put some data into that container. And this is generally done in the setup phase. So I set my standard size, my background, and this time I say, okay, I'm going to take my count container and I'm going to load an image into it. So I use the load image command, and inside the brackets in double quotes, I give it the name of my image. The only catch here is that image must be located in the same place as your program. So here you can see my count image in the folder that my program is in. If they're not in the same folder, it's not going to be able to find it, and it's going to give you an error down here in red when you run it. Okay, so I call the image, load it up, and then finally in my draw function, I draw the image using, well, the image command. And I say image. Okay, that tells it I'm loading an image, I'm drawing an image. I give it the name of my image container, and then I say where I want to go, the X value and the Y value. And if I run this, well, I get a tiny weird part of this picture, because if you look back here, the image I actually want to load up is, well, the count from Sesame Street. But it's a very big picture. And that doesn't fit entirely on my screen, because I had a pretty small screen to find. So we need to change this image up a bit, and we can do that just using the image command. So I'm going to comment this out and look down here. So I'm adding 2 extra bits, and these bits tell me what I want the width and height of my image to be. And so to start off with, I'm going to say, okay, let's set the width and the height of my image to be the width and the height of the screen. So if I do that, suddenly the count fills the entire screen. Kind of nice, right? But what if you want to do something else? What if I want to change the size so he's smaller than the screen? Well, I'll do the exact same thing, except this time I'm going to do width divided by 2 and height divided by 2. So he's going to be half the screen. And there you go. He's about half the screen's width and half the screen's height. Okay, so now we've got the count being drawn on the screen. He's half the size of the screen. And you tell me, okay, but I want that picture to be centered. And that's kind of a pain to do with just standard X and Y coordinates by the bottom corner, because then you have to worry about the width of this guy. So there is a way to position things from the center of the image instead of the top corner of the image. Because right now, I'm putting it at 0, 0, and 0, 0, well, that's my top corner of the image, is 0, 0. And that's where it goes. But if I want to adjust it so that instead of 0, 0, putting the top corner of my image at 0, 0, I want the center of my image to go at 0, 0, I can use the center command out of image mode. So I'm going to comment out this line, and I set image mode the center, which just says instead of using my corner, use the center to place your image. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing. And now, oh dear, he shows up over here. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Because now the center of my image, where his nose approximately is showing up at the coordinate 0, 0. Not quite what we wanted, so we can adjust that a little bit further. And instead of setting it at 0, 0, we set it at the middle of the screen, in the middle of the height, middle of the width. And look at that, we've got a nice centered picture. If you want to center something and then put something else the standard way, you can just reset the image mode back using image mode corners. Now that I've walked you through this stuff on your own, it's time to take a look at the practice assignment. So, if statement practice assignment, the link is up on your web page, or on my web page. I'd like you to make 2 programs. The first program is going to be a modification of the if statement one. So you're making a program that'll display a red circle when you press the R key, a green circle when you press the green key, and a blue square when you press the B key. So each shape should appear on the screen when the key is pressed and disappear after it's, well, pressed again. So it'll look something like this. And no, I'm not going to give you this code in the assignment folder. This is the one you have to write yourself. So I press the R key, the red circle shows up. I press the R key again, it vanishes. I press the G key and my green triangle vanishes, and so on and so on. Once that program is done, I'd like you to make another one. And you can base it off the same code, and I want it to be very similar except for you're working with images. I want you to make a program that will load up certain images based on a key you press. So here I have the count. I press another key. He counts 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. Okay? If you get both of these done, that is awesome. I have a challenge for you. try making an animation. So an animation is just a series of images that are quickly loaded up one over the other. Kind of like a little flip book, right? Except a digital flip book. So try making something and animate it by flipping some images back and forth. Okay? You guys have today and tomorrow to work on these, and I'll see you back on Wednesday. Hope you have a great couple days.